ready. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Hello. Hi. I'll just do a short intro for our guest tonight. It's very exciting to welcome Olga Ulturgasheva. And she is a senior lecturer at University of Manchester, an indigenous Siberian scholar. Her research has focused on childhood and adolescence, narrative and memory, animist and nomadic cosmologies, reindeer herding and hunting, climate change, and the latest environmental transformations in Siberia and Alaska, and the response of the indigenous communities. So yes, I'd just like to welcome Olga. And Olga, unmute yourself, because I was muting everybody to keep out the noise.
Okay, thank you so much, Camilla, for inviting me to present. It's very nice to see this amazing community and members of the seminar called Radical Anthropology. If anything, radical is the most useful term these days, I think. Yeah, and I love the term for the, chosen for the seminar. So I first will share the screen, okay? Just a second. So the title for my seminar paper today is Reading Reindeer Shoulder Blades, Engaging with Environmental Uncertainty in Northeast Siberia. The need for effective responses to unpredictable climate events faces many peoples over the world. This is a time when human capacities for adaptation and adjustment to different scales of exposure to technogenic catastrophes and the effects of climate change are being profoundly questioned. The narratives of the dramatic, just a second, I need to change the narratives of dramatic change offered by indigenous communities and international climate scientists have been ceaselessly pointing to an immense sense of unpredictability generated by the rapidly disappearing cryosphere. These are reports of the unprecedented extinction of ice-dependent worlds and of increasing likelihood for thousands of towns and villages located along the Arctic coastline to be threatened by rising sea levels and loss of the sea ice. All of the above will only intensify in the course of the next couple of decades, with methane released by rapidly thawing permafrost. The continuous rapacious extraction of subsurface resources makes increasingly clear that the ice-free Arctic is no longer located in the distant future, but is lurking just around the corner. The questions of how we understand human and non-human capacities to avert risks and hazards, how we take into account the increasing vulnerability of communities, and how we comprehend the relationship of multi-species feedbacks to new and emerging forms of normal, highlight the importance of the need to recognize the urgency of acknowledging that expert knowledge emerges in many forms, and this knowledge may be communicated in many ways. The understanding of complex networks of risks and strategies undertaken to ameliorate them will depend on how they are interpreted and articulated, and by whom. The forthcoming scenarios require attentive consideration of the capacities, local, regional, national, and international, of the human resources, including available infrastructures that could be utilized and built upon while dealing with the unexpected emergency situations. The cases, or ethnographic vignettes, rather, I'm presenting today will offer the discussion of, first, how total reliance on the data generated by the satellite undermined local firefighting efforts during recent Siberian wildfires. Second, how reindeer herders' practice of reducing environmental uncertainty through the everyday reading of a reindeer shoulder blade saved human and reindeer lives. And the third, what type of expertise is activated in a situation that requires urgent response? And in particular, I shall look at the rescue operation performed by local drivers when 30 passengers got stuck in the middle of the extremely cold winter night in the middle of Verkhoyanye mountains. The three cases will encourage us to consider what actors, as well as networks and forms of knowledge, are mobilized or failed to be mobilized to provide rescue and emergency response. In all cases, I consider the ways actors are articulating both their sense of threat, their understanding of causality, their strategic responses, and what type of preparations or lack of preparations enable or disable mobilization efforts. In summer 2020, a spell of abnormally hot weather across large territories of Siberian Arctic saw nearly 300 wildfires blazing at once, causing record-high carbon emissions, burning entire settlements to the ground, profoundly jeopardizing human and non-human lives, and speeding up degradation of permafrost. I experienced the impact of those wildfires when I traveled with locals from the city of Yakutsk to a reindeer herding community located in the northeast part of the region. The area that we traveled across was covered with a thick haze of smoke. It felt as if the entire earth was exuding plumes of smoke. Just as my eyes were irritated and my nose congested, my fellow passengers also continuously coughed and sneezed during the entire trip. Soon after reaching the village, I had a chance to speak to a group of local men who volunteered to fight local forest fires. My interlocutors informed me how their efforts at extinguishing the fire ended up being fruitless because the regional and federal authorities failed to listen to them. Instead, it looked like the authorities had done everything to prevent accurate identification of the location of fires and timely mobilization of firefighting crews. This organizational failure was due to several factors, one of which was the authorities' reliance on a digital mobile application that was expected to provide accurate readings of the thermal state of the surface grounds. In the spring of 2020, the authorities indeed invested several million rubles in the development of a mobile phone application for receiving satellite data on wildfires and floods. The application was expected to identify the location of fires, as well as mapping and monitoring their developments. The mapping data was then transmitted across all departments of the regional emergency infrastructure. On the basis of the provided data, the regional officials made decisions and developed their firefighting plans. These technology-based decisions were communicated in a top-down manner, leaving no space for human, ground-based observations. The visual information transmitted by application consisted of images of blue and yellow spots. So, as you see on this slide, how it shows what this 2020 data looked like. The blue spots indicate the areas where the fire is almost extinguished and the firefighting is ongoing. And the yellow ones are the areas where new wildfires have just started and where firefighting measures are needed. What is obvious is that such satellite images grossly oversimplify a complex landscape. This visual oversimplification reduces the complexity of events on the ground to one type of color reading that often undermine the efforts people put into fighting the fire. According to one of the local members of the firefighting brigade, the problem was that because of the unusually high air temperature, the grounds got heated to an extent that the satellite took the heated surface for the fire. Such inaccuracy delayed rescue from the center, where it was most needed, for several weeks. The satellite readings also conflicted with the observations from the community members who were witnessing the developments of wildfires near the village. The people had to work on extinguishing the fire with no support from federal and regional emergency forces, and the effects of their efforts was minimal, as they were trying to do this with their bare hands. Moreover, instead of showing that the blaze was already over, the satellite read the smoke from an already burned area as an active fire. The satellite data also missed fires that were starting up and gave a false sense that there was no need for an immediate emergency response. The forces were thus directed to the wrong location. The application data was the basis upon which authorities could decide whose responsibility it was to fight the fire. If the fire was located on federal lands, it was the responsibility of elusive federal authorities to organize firefighting and implement risk prevention measures. If the fire was within municipal lands, it was the responsibility of the local administration to organize firefighting brigades out of the local population. The effort to identify whose responsibility it was to organize firefighting delayed the urgently needed response by weeks. What became clear from our conversation is that this application works according to a specific algorithm that identifies the data selectively. It does not generate an inclusive view that takes into account not only surface temperature, but also cloud thickness and specificities of the landscape, whether it is mountains or tundra, high rocks or hills. Above all, it cannot see the heterogeneous constitution of the permafrost soils. The interaction between fire and permafrost generates a terminal regime that may not necessarily match the satellite receptors through which temperature is read. In 2020, the satellite's capacity to provide accurate readings of the permafrost-bound land turned out to be limited. Moreover, the application took the high temperature regime on the top of the mountains for fire, while real fire in less obvious locations was not read. Thus, this mobile application data could only provide an approximate snapshot of a real-life time situation. The discrepancy between snapshot and reality proved dangerously vast, endangering an area already ravaged by wildfires. The latter highlights how the total reliance on digital technologies, including satellite data, may prevent effective responses to emergency situations. The question of whose lands will prevail in such situations reveals the power asymmetry of visions, where the perception and the view of the emergency by many reindeer herders cannot compete with the one of the state space corporation called Roscosmos. In the financial stakes and power assertion game in which the space corporation Roscosmos is involved, it is obvious that the vision of the state wins as an exclusive viewer with a superior controlling perspective. As Hollenstein's theory of an optimal perspective asserts, it is the perspective which makes the rest of the perspectives appear to be oriented towards it. But as we saw, Roscosmos is engaged in a self-defeating game, as the fire still spreads and moves from more or less controllable to extremely uncontrollable. Control is not the point, and this is not what really matters here. What matters is that the fire is still burning. So any sort of power games are actually leading only to the defeat and extreme insecurity. This resonates well with Cath Weston's discussion of techno-futurism and techno-fixes that tend to equate new with good or better. It is a particular techno-vision that is obsessed with soft techno-solutions that are shiny, ingenious, and seductive, just like the firefighting application. In the techno-futuristic vision, climate change presents a problem. Technology offers a solution. The proposed solutions vary, but they draw upon a modernist lineage of industrial utopias, audacious ideas, and innovative machines. For Avert reindeer herders, the latest dynamic of environmental calamities, including wildfires, only confirms all over again importance of mobility, flexibility, and constant alertness. Constant alertness conditions the everyday necessity for accepting uncertainty. In each situation of uncertainty, emergency, and risk associated with climate change, there is always a novel element or an element of uncertainty which emerged unpredictably despite all preparations. It is not that the situations are completely new, but their scale and intensity show that there is always an unexpected twist to a familiar situation of the emergency. That is to say, people have to be ready to navigate the uncertain while relying on the known strategies that embrace ontological uncertainty. Such readiness and acceptance requires skills and mindset honed and mastered in the course of everyday movements along risky routes and passages. The acceptance of uncertainty together with flexibility and alertness entail that a broad set of variables is required for taking a decision on a plan for action. In spring of 2020, several reindeer herding families made a collective decision to change their usual itinerary and move to the highest point of the Verkhayani Mountains. This decision was made following the ritual of reading a wild reindeer shoulder blade. Reindeer herders carry out the divination with the animal shoulder blade ritual right before taking a long-distance trip, usually undertaken when their reindeer require a change of pastures. If the shoulder blade burn before a forthcoming trip cracks along a straight line, the trip is meant to be uneventful and smooth. If the crack creates a hole in the blade, it is understood as a sign of potential misfortune that can be very hard to avert. However, in this case, an experienced reindeer herder and leader of one of the herding camps, Semyon Borisov, told me the following, the quote: "During last spring, I read the reindeer shoulder prediction several times, and several times I saw signs that looked almost identical. I kept the dried shoulder blade of a wild reindeer that has just been hunted by my brother over the fire until I saw the first cracks. The cracks resembled the flames of the fire, and I felt that a large wildfire is on its way. Next time, I read the shoulder blade again and saw the shape of the mountains and high rocks. After I saw high rocks several times, we decided to change location of the reindeer pastures. We moved further up, circumventing our usual seasonal route, and reached the alpine meadows at the top of mountain range. The area turned out to be safe for our reindeer and our families all summer. It is our mountains that saved us." End of quote. I need to add that reindeer herders' techniques to predict the future include not only meticulous observations of the present, including signs appearing on a reindeer shoulder blade, but also an attempt to prevent calamity by appeasing the spirits of the land, who, when properly fed and not disturbed by the loud presence of humans, of their greedy behavior, do not cause harm. People understand the chances to contain the threat from powerful non-human forces may increase if they give the first piece of the hunted game to the land, as their deities respond by providing benevolent protection. The ritual of appeasing the spirits of the land is aimed at containing their whims and encouraging their benign protective influence. By conducting these rituals, people attempt to generate a reading out of uncertainty, but they also understand the decision to take an action need to be based on the awareness that there is no single answer to a complex situation, and that the experience and knowledge that people gained and developed over a lengthy course of time play a crucial role in devising a strategy for averting a potential disaster. Now I would like to consider another episode of rescue that illustrates what actors as well as networks and forms of knowledge are mobilized to provide rescue and what type of preparation makes such mobilization effective. Again, shall see how technological communication system literally fails. And we shall see how local ability to provide rescue is formed and built upon a network of support forged in the course of a long-term practice of mutual aid, support, and rescue. On January 14, 2020, 2 vans with 30 passengers set off for a long ride to reach a regional hub located 300 kilometers away from a remote village of Avert reindeer herders. The Avert village, which sits on one of the highest points of the rugged Verkhoyanski mountain range, has been one of the remotest points in the region. The only connection it has with an outside world is maintained by the road built by Gulag prisoners between 1930 and 1960s. The road runs like a serpentine through dangerous high passes, numerous frozen rivers and brooks, along collapsed bridges, and abandoned vestiges from the Gulag era, marked by watchtowers and barbed wire fences. The traveling villages that day included local reindeer herders traveling to attend various errands and visit their relatives settled in the district hub, students returning to the city for the beginning of the college term, and a number of elderly men, pregnant women, children, and toddlers in need of specialized medical care available only in the hub. As no alternative transportation was available, I joined the group. When we departed, it was late afternoon. The sky was clear and bright blue, and freezing winter air was refreshing and crispy. I was invited to sit next to one of the van's driver, whose name was Innocenty. Due to the complete lack of technical aid stations along the road, local drivers always travel in twos to provide mutual backup in case of a breakdown. We were the only vehicles on a lonely, icy road for almost the entire trip, which was uneventful and smooth until midnight, when suddenly our van's engine started smoking. I had fallen asleep and woke when I smelled the smoking engine. The van stopped and all passengers were asked to take a break. Some passengers started slowly getting off the van when we saw how the other van had also started spreading smoke while producing strange noise. The view of both vans with smoking engines was quite frightening. All of the passengers went suddenly quiet. No one screamed. Everything was going in almost complete silence, and I felt like time was not running anymore, but crawling very slowly. We realized that we had stopped in the middle of the high mountains, 2 kilometers away from the hub, in the middle of the frigid night, with the temperature now reaching -62 Celsius. While we were trying to estimate both vans' chances of restarting, the smoke got only worse. Innocenty suddenly screamed, "All get out of the vans and run. The van is about to explode." When we ran about 3 meters away from the van, I realized that one of the men took a bottle of fresh water out of his backpack, jumped below the van, and snuffed the fire out by pouring water on the burning wire. This lasted for about 2 or 3 minutes. The van didn't explode, but it went completely dead. The second van could not restart either. With extreme cold weather outside, both drivers started rearranging the passengers. They moved all women, children, and the elderly to the warmer van and asked all men to warm themselves by making fire from the trees outside. They knew the temperature inside the van would gradually drop, and it would eventually get dangerously cold. As neither van could be repaired on the spot, the only chance of rescue was to phone the emergency service. Innokenty fortunately had a satellite phone with credit for 2 super short calls. At the first attempt, he reached an emergency department of the regional government located in Yakutsk. The passengers stopped breathing and pricked their ears, waiting for their response. But what both Innokenty and I heard was very unclear speech, which sounded like a rumbling. Innokenty said to me, "The guy on the other end is drunk. He's asking weird questions and doesn't understand what I'm saying." I had clearly heard Innokenty's short statement to the person on the other end. Quote, "2 vans with 30 passengers are stuck on the road called Yana. It is -60 Celsius. We are about to freeze. I request urgent rescue." End of quote. The call ended at this point and we started waiting. Almost 3 hours passed. There was no sign of any rescue coming. And Innokenty told me that it was probably too early to get anything by this time. I offered Innokenty the source button on my phone. And actually, at that point, my iPhone froze, completely dead. So he decided to use his final call. And as soon as the call was received, he said, quote, "Please urgently phone this number." He quoted the phone number. "Tell them that I am stuck on the river Minkule with 30 passengers. They know what to do." End of quote. Innokenty hung up. We waited for another 3 hours. The van was steadily getting colder and colder. We were about to freeze in those 2 vans, when suddenly, out of nowhere, 2 cars emerged on that lonely, snowy road. In deep darkness, the vehicle lights made those cars look like 2 UFO ships. The drivers were Innokenty's friends, who brought everything needed at that moment: hot food and warm blankets. The first car took the women and children. We got into the second car and made it safely to the district hub. Later, Innokenty told us that the emergency response had been delayed as the operator understood that a van was stuck on the river Yana, not on the road Yana. So he had phoned the wrong emergency units located nearby river Yana. After looking for the lost van in the wrong place, they reported that no vehicles had been found along the river route. If Innokenty had not made the second call, asking the emergency person to phone his friends, we would not have been saved. A perfect storm of adverse conditions, climatological or infrastructural, thus put us at extreme risk. As if the extreme weather conditions with falling temperatures, near zero nighttime visibility, a mountainous landscape, and virtually impassable forest were not enough. Rescue efforts were also hampered by poor roads and mistaken information about location. We were lucky. This episode contains several important points for our discussion. First, it is the risk situation that reveals the inadequacy of the regional emergency response infrastructure, including technology of communication, that is dependent on faulty communication system, one that enables the possibility for misinformation. As we saw, any decisions made on the basis of misinformation have deadly potential to lead to casualties. The miscommunication between the person asking for rescue and the rescue services was due to poor equipment, which could not properly work at that moment. But the efforts were also hampered by the inability of the operator to understand the urgent language of our driver. The driver was stressed, and again, due to the restrictions of the communication technology, was unable to provide an intelligible request. On top of that, there were many unknowns. First, the poor connection made the addressee sound drunk. He might have been drunk and tired because his life was falling apart. He was receiving unacceptably low salary and was generally depressed. He may have been sitting in his office on his own, as everyone was out celebrating the new year with their families. As a rule, the system and the people inside the entire system are running out of juice, resources, and fuel. It was a time which continues to the present, when everything was breaking down. People were overexhausted. There was a deficit of all resources. We all were running out of capacity. Neither the driver nor I could know any of these things for sure. And the phone technology at our disposal did not give us the time or the connection to ensure mutual understanding. That was total failure to perceive the emergency right, to get the narrative right, and on the basis of the narrative to generate a proper system response in Innocente's first attempt. The reaction to the second call was radically different. The urgency, the location, and the conditions were facts that those local drivers understood immediately. They succeeded where the system had failed. They had traveled this road many times. They knew the location, and they knew what people needed in order to survive such freezing conditions. Their expertise was accessible only through the relatedness network of which Innocente was part. These are friends who have continually backed up each other, and as a result, had built the kind of connection and trust that worked effectively at the moment of crisis. And this is the expertise that is not featured in the formal top-down emergency system, which means that it is often destined, which actually means that it is often destined to fail. The local population, on the other hand, precisely invests their time and energy in this type of emergency response and social network. Despite much emphasis in the literature on the importance of local knowledge, I want to stress that it is not just local knowledge, but the relational networks built upon through knowledge that are key here. In our case, the driver's relational network meant he knew who to call, which of his network would be the most reliably prepared, A, to get there right away, and B, be there together with the right staff, and C, know where we were located. So it is a complex set of knowledges that are not just about environmental understanding, but also of the background, which allow the driver to make an instant assessment of who to contact in the first instance. The questions to emerge out of this episode concern expertise or failure to know and action, that is to say, activation of rescue. The event when we were saved by drivers from the regional hub impresses us with their ability to perform a coordinated action. The immediate, well-coordinated and well-executed response was a result of an experience gained through the long-term grounded preparations. This is not only an ethnography of coordinated action, however, it is also about the kind of heroism which come out of the everyday regular practice in which skills for such coordinated action are honed. The success of the rescue may have seemed like heroism to us, but it was not even seen by drivers as heroism due to its everydayness. Here, their day-to-day observations and experiences include an awareness that the unexpected is always around the corner and requires flexible responses. The knowledge is everyday, not routine, but learned through everyday practices and observations. So the heroism, in my view, lies in being able to marshal that everyday knowledge in response to emergency that is decidedly not every day. Such expertise includes an assumption of the unexpected. My discussion does not aim to devalue the techno solutions, including the communication technologies. If the mobile application giving false information about wildfires and endangering people's lives was the case last summer, the following winter GPS and helicopters were absolutely crucial for saving people's lives in other emergency situations across the region. Also, GPS were absolutely vital in saving people during late snow or avalanches. Therefore, when it comes to techno solutions and techno risks, there is no black and white answer. Standardization of strategies is not helpful in this type of high run of pressure regime. As we saw in two ethnographic episodes presented today, there is always a nuance to each situation. To come up with one type of strategy for all situations might be dangerous and can potentially jeopardize lives. Here, I'm not trying to discard or exclude a particular form of knowledge. I'm trying to explore how the complex information provided by the satellites, mobile applications, and daily human observations, including readings of reindeer shoulder blades, needs to be processed with a critical eye for the limitations they offer. I neither want to trump one form of knowledge against the other, nor demonize the digital technologies, but there is an urgent need in better evaluations of what the digital or artificial intelligence are useful for and in what situations. The case with the satellite's inability to see shows that the too much reliance on technology, which excludes human as well as non-human centric factors, for example, readings generated by a reindeer shoulder blade, cannot provide a proper emergency response. For the emergency situations, there is no one purely technological response, nor purely human or non-human one. There should be a combination of several technologies or responses happening at once. Situations cannot be read through a one-size-fits-all type of response system. The danger is that when such systems define the response, multiple other factors are not brought into a larger picture, and fatal emissions may occur. The situation when 300 fires back in 2020 were blazing simultaneously is disturbing and appalling. But in the summer of 2021, this number multiplied by 6. The issues that I discussed in this paper had already intensified unimaginably, with 1,600 fires that during the summer of 2021 were burning at once. The situation is exploding in its intensity. Everything that I described became impossibly worse a year after, and is already getting out of control this year. Wildfires known as zombie fires, smoldering under the surface of peat-rich soil throughout the winter, are already re-emerging in some parts of Siberia. The current geopolitical situation, the disastrous connection between the war in Ukraine and global warming has high likelihood for unfolding erratically in Siberia. It looks like this year Siberian wildfires will only increase in their power and rage, becoming even more uncontrollable because of rapidly shrinking firefighting resources and the absence of military forces that in summer 2021 were deployed for fighting wildfires. This year, they are in Ukraine, coercively mobilized in the atrocious genocidal war. Here, at this point, I feel a bit like my Siberian firefighting brigades. It is virtually impossible to keep up. Thus, I am not drawing conclusions, not only because it is a to-be-continued story, but hold on to your heads because it is speeding up exponentially. We're always already behind, given the accelerating nature of post-tipping point processes, that behindness keeps increasing. Dar Jamal, a natural scientist and the author of The End of the Ice, feels that it is already too late and that all he can do is bear witness. But others, such as local rescue experts and indigenous reindeer herders, like our Siberian Avern reindeer herders, feel differently. Recently, I was approached by both regional rescue experts and Avern reindeer herders to come up jointly with a potential rescue and risk mitigation plan for a massive flash flood made likely by rapidly melting permafrost. The Avert village, with its 2,000 residents, is located in northwest of the Verkhoyanny mountain range. Two large mountain lakes, rapidly increasing in size and depth due to the intensified rate of permafrost thaw, have lately triggered the collapse of the mountain that served as a protective fence between one lake and the village. According to the village mayor, once both lakes merge, the village will be destroyed by a massive flash flood. The community has been requesting thorough examination and observations from experts to estimate risks and provide an analysis of potential disaster, as well as its impact to generate the risk mitigation plan and rescue strategy in case the disaster strikes. While speaking to the local rescue experts, I proposed the co-production of knowledge about potential climate-related catastrophe that the mayor of village says is receiving no public attention and urgently needs it. All the processes currently unfolding highlight that we are facing positive feedback loops of increasing intensity and complexity. At the same time, in the midst of the immensity of global climate change, I'm listening to specific people talk about confronting particular issues. It is their urgency I'm engaging with, that, to paraphrase one Siberian Avert rescue, is what I do. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? Who is sharing?
I think Camilla is, but maybe she's disappeared.
Yeah, no, I'm here, but Chris, if you can help, because my connection is behaving badly. So, but are there any questions for Olga? Annie.
Sorry, I've got the wrong sign up.
Oh, you weren't talking.
No.
Anybody else?
I was clapping.
Oh. Please, yeah. It was,
Denise has got her hand up. Denise,
please.
go on.
Yes, thank you, Olga, very much for the talk. Very
Denise.
interesting. I work in the Andes, and I think there's a wider problem here about coordinating human actions. I remember reading when we were working with midwives about studies of how midwives coordinate when there's a complex birth going on with various kinds of massage and so on and so on. And the other study like that I remember, but back in the 1990s now, a study of air traffic controllers, if the radar systems go down, how they learn to communicate very fast in a very small group of humans. And I just wondered whether you'd been looking at any of that kind of background reading, because it just seems like a great hole in where we are at the moment as a planet, and that those studies were very important in their time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for these suggestions. I would appreciate if you could send me the references, and the names of the authors. These are brilliant suggestions, actually, about midwives and air traffic controllers, because these are precisely the kind of people who are at the forefront of this emergency responses. They are the ones who actually have to mobilize several types of expertise, including their social networks, in order to come up with immediate solutions and rescue and save people's lives. So I'm here. And these two episodes that I was just discussing, exactly looking at that type of situations when people have to literally draw from several strategies at the same time. So that simultaneous response that actually fascinated me, and how actually what actually it has also shown, and I'm sure in the case of midwives and air traffic controllers, just one black and white response to a complex situation actually may jeopardize people's lives. So it is, in a sense, very much a human factor, you know, that is at the end. The types of expertise that the person has to juggle, you know, and quickly generate the right strategy at almost on the spot, that actually matters here, you know. And I was here, and particularly in the rescue episode, you saw how this is it is done by the driver, you know, how he's quickly assessing the his own capacities, but also those strategies that he already have used in the past. So one hasn't worked, you know. So and you saw how technologies like literally failed. So, and he's the second assessment that he actually, it wasn't his assessment, but actually his friend's assessment that came up, almost like devised their rescue response on the spot, and came up in 3 hours time or 4 hours time, I can't remember. Yeah, 5 hours time. Or so it was it's quite a long time of waiting. And I do remember how my you know, extremities, my hands and legs and feet started literally like literally getting so cold. I was afraid that I'm just about, you know, to get some form of inflammation or being and everyone else was in this type of position. So, and so that rescue operation really struck very much, because by the immediate solution that have provided, and they knew what to do. That assessment, this is what fascinated me, because they actually, it has shown that repertoire, the scenarios of risk, is already out there. They're prepared, you know, they already were honing their skills to come up with a solution. And as you saw, the solution was pretty basic, you know. It wasn't based on some sort of state of the art or some sort of like techno advances that have been used in the past. They knew that what matters is actually the speed of response, you know. So, and to some extent, I mean, again, if we look at the first episode, when I was speaking about, you know, satellites, the failure of satellite data that was transmitted to the mobile application, it also shown how, you know, any form of the standardization actually in providing emergency response in that and in this case was a firefighting strategy, never works, you know, because there is always some form of the nuances that are not taken into account. And quite often people on the ground observations become much more accurate. It doesn't mean that the same response will work in other types of situation. It has to be always a combination and convergence of several type of expert systems that require an effective emergency response. Have I answered your question?
Yenneker, did you want to have a question?
Yes, thank you, Olga. Thank you so much for such a great talk. I wondered whether you could comment a little bit more on the role of the state here. And in particular, I'm sort of thinking, on one hand, if we talk about responses, then, you know, what is the response to? So are there like different values for the community versus the state? You know, what is actually valued and what is being saved? And perhaps also, is there sort of a backdrop of reliance or non-reliance on others, and particularly the state? Is there some sort of a suspicion there, perhaps? So yeah, just a little bit about the state as the provider of the alternative.
as you have seen, the state fails here, right? So state comes up with this top-down solution, as you have heard, solution that actually is based on the vision of the satellite, you know. So the satellite vision is ultimate vision of the state, you know. So it kind of tells you how you have, what you have to see, and how you have to engage with the emergency, with the environmental disaster. So it orders you how you have to behave. And what we saw, that contradiction, you know, that community members, actually firefighters, local firefighters actually see that this is completely wrong perception of the disaster. So it's not only wrong, it's dangerous, you know, and it creates further serious cascading kind of effect of danger and environmental you know, insecurity in a very profound sense. So whatever role the state plays is actually, you know, is a multiplier of the risk situations and multiplier of emergency. So, and it has a knock-on effect, as you see. So because the number of, if the number of fire multiplies and nothing is done, and it still relies on this faulty system, then of course the system fails. So in a sense, it is a failed, let's say, false pretense of the expertise that is performed by the state. I'm here more focusing on the type of knowledge and expertise that is deployed in devising specific emergency response to the environmental calamity that is ongoing right here. And this is what interests me here, rather than the role of the state. The role of the state is pretty clear, you know, it cannot deal with the situation. And what actually my discussion suggests is this multiple perspective, and multiple types of expertise have to be combined properly, including the state one. State mechanisms are there, but it seems like the state is destined to fail because of the inability to respond properly to the climate change dynamic. And because it is always late, so it is always late. That lateness, that behindness that is actually state performs is absolutely staggering and is mortal for a local population.
Mm. So Olga, just I'm so sorry I missed the bit where you were talking about the reindeer shoulder blades, which was so interesting. But you seem to be suggesting, well, that the local people have been finding their ways, their ways of creating relationships, of mobilizing knowledge, of knowing who to ask, when to ask. Has this been going on for a long time, that's the standard position as far as Siberian and any concerned in relation to the state, or is this now becoming more acute?
Yeah, thank you for a great question. I'm glad you like my reindeer shoulder blade bits. You know, so reindeer actually, as I wanted to show that how, you know, in the absence of any sort of state support, reindeer herders still are making, you know, trying to, I mean, it doesn't mean that the state support is not needed. It's absolutely needed. You know, it doesn't mean that they're not vulnerable. They're absolutely vulnerable. But what they do, actually, they respond to the situation as agents, as actors. They come up with the specific device. And I'm here, I think, more interested, I think, while I was discussing reindeer shoulder blade, and the way it is, the readings that generate the ritual of divination, you know, when you use the readings, you know, the science of the reindeer shoulder blade to come up with some solution, or come up with the, let's say, so reindeer shoulder predicts, right, a specific situation. They see that there is a calamity on the way. So, and it looks like reindeer, I mean, obviously they discuss it, they say, oh, okay, I saw this in the morning. This is probably what will happen. Let's see how we can respond, see what is possible, what is not. So they engage in this reading the future, but also generating knowledge on the go, literally, So I've just lately read the discussion of, I've been engaged looking at several, I think, works of climate scientists, and particularly models of climate, the way models are being read, but also the models that are being used to provide predictions for the future dynamic of the climate. And it seems like everyone understands that the models are never perfect, And just like reindeer herders, they look at the reindeer blade science and lines that it generates. Just like climate scientists, they understand it provides a specific template for the action, but it's broad enough, It's so that you engage with it, with the question, am I going to be safe tomorrow? What should I do? So, but unlike climate scientists, I guess, the model is always like there is singularity about the form of the model, but reindeer herders are actually engaged with the multiple readings. It's not like one, and they take the attempts of reading shoulder blade every single, for example, morning, So they're dealing with several climate, like literally models, several readings that is generated out of, just like you pick musk, the reindeer shoulder blade is the window into is the connection with the ancestor spirit world, with the animal spirit and the earth, particularly the land, The land tells them through this piece of the hunted wild reindeer, which is like embodiment of the earth, the embodiment of the land. It tells them in how they have to interact with the potential disaster, So, and how they have to avert the disaster, how they can minimize the risk. And of course, as you saw, they draw on the mobility patterns. They straight away packed, and change the location of their pastures, change the location of their reindeer herding camp. So this is what I thought is fascinating when I'm been looking at these climate scientists, So the way they engage with the question of prediction and the model, and the climate science models. I'm just like, I gave very sort of,
Yeah.
approximate answer, I guess, hopefully, yeah.
No, thank you. That's very interesting. But yeah, I mean, presumably for any culture, these very high risks and the need for these strong social relationships to counteract that great unpredictability is built into the culture for, it's long past. So in many ways, this is just a modern version of kind of nomadic people's ways of, life ways. It's going to be,
Yes, absolutely.
Suppose that's,
yeah, it is more animist response to emergency, So they are actually drawing on their relations with the hunted, with the spirit of the animal, the world of animal spirits and the world of ancestors. All of that are communicating their concerns, I guess, or their over safety, of their descendants through the reindeer shoulder blade. Yeah. There are several things that are happening there. I just didn't have a chance to properly unpack it, but I'll do that, soon.
Yeah, Great. I'd like to hear that.
So Olga, you said that you're reading climate scientists' work, and that one of the scientists you have been following was fearing and perhaps kind of getting close to certain that a terrible tipping point had already been reached when you see this exponential increase each year since 2020 of the number of fires and the amount of permafrost melting and the amount of methane going into the air and so on. And then you said that your driver and his local indigenous friends had a different view, and they weren't so sort of despairing, I suppose is the right word. I was wondering, because I need some help, because I'm in danger of despairing, of course, as so many of us are. What was the grounds for the I wouldn't say optimism, but for the feeling that something can still be done, that you found among your own friends and in particular your driver? And I just wanted to say that, and the critical thing is that it's not just about information, is it? It's like you were saying that the information provided by the satellite, by the app and the satellite and so on was just useless. But of course, what your driver knew was who would benefit from the information. He wanted to give the information about where you were and what the situation was to people who would know what to do about it. The trouble at the moment is we have plenty of information about the looming catastrophe of climate change, and our politicians over in this part of the world, in Britain, they kind of, they're constantly being given this information, and it doesn't help because they're just the wrong people to get the information. They're interested in other things completely. They're interested in amount of sort of cash they can put in their back pocket from various corrupt deals and stuff. So I suppose I need some hope, and I don't know whether obviously we've all got to find hope. We've got to be the hope, obviously, as well as just trying to find it. But where does your driver and his friends, where did they get any hope from, is I suppose the question.
Yeah, they're very difficult question, So, but what I want to say is, of course, there is the discussion of the doom and gloom and everything is, it's not giving any hope, And Dar Jamal is also saying, well, the only thing what we can do is bear witness, but the only thing remain to do is bear witness. Let's be witness to the end of the world. But I'm a bit concerned about this because just like those drivers and reindeer herders, I see them doing something, I see them doing things in situ. They engage with the concrete disasters and climate. And it is also a model for our thinking, because they're not engaged in denial of climate change. They are not engaged in politics surrounding climate change, and they are not engaged in precisely, in sort of corrupt distribution of funds, that have been given to deal with or tackle climate change, So all this financial, political stuff that is actually on the way to the concrete action, this is what I see in this type of, in both episodes, where that the disaster is there, nobody's questioning it, So nobody is engaged in the denying that, or firefighting is not there. It's just as if it's just a matter or a product of left-wing, intellectuals and discussion and their concerns. Not like, do you know what I mean? Like, this is what we see is actually that complete absence of that, and how people could have been dealt with without all these concerns over power, knowledge, power imbalances, but also inequalities and all that stuff that is being generated by the enlightenment-driven world,
Okay. Yeah, it's obviously, yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, it's quite clear that indigenous people around the planet have got by far the most likely, not just ideas, but connections and insights that are needed. But obviously, somehow they've got to, or we've got to make sure that those also get to, in a way, states. I mean, in many of us, of course, over here are involved in things like Extinction Rebellion, and the sort of irony is that Extinction Rebellion still, and I can't see any way around this, still place demands on the state to do various things to, to mitigate problems, and if where possible, get sort of targets to cut down on emissions. So somehow the state, I mean, it's kind of there. And there was a time in the 90s when we had these massive movements, which culminated in Seattle in 1999, when we didn't put demands on people because we thought they are the wrong people to, I mean, what on earth's the point of putting demands on these various states around the world? I mean, any solution will have to come from below, from all of us. I'm not quite sure we're still in that position, but even though we would need to kind of get back to that, but I know it's not really fair to sort of ask you to, or anyone really, an individual, to come up with solutions which we can all kind of think, okay, that's that. Then we've got a solution. So yeah. It's more challenging than that.
But I'm not. I mean, what I'm saying as well is that what Extinction Rebellion, these type of movements, alongside Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, I mean, all these are critical for challenging the, the system that is driving environmental destruction. So that is a different layer of concern. What I'm looking at actually at the critical kind of points, very concrete points, and where people made it safely, to the other end, so in a sense, like, how do you actually survive the disaster and what resources are required? What I'm saying is that there is no standard, one size fits all solution to all things, and every single and trying to look critically at such solutions that come up with technovision obsessed, kind of the vision that is obsessed with technical solution or artificial intelligence. So these are just, if we kind of separate, that concern over safety and complexity of the disasters and what sort of knowledges it require, that's one thing. And another thing is precisely these political movements that are absolutely essential. And they are working within this paradigm that is doing everything to ensure, not really everything that the pushes the humanity and the earth into abyss, so that is the absolutely essential. I mean, these are just different facets of the same question of how does one deal with the climate change.
I can see Jamie.
Jamie, yeah.
Introduce yourself a bit, Jamie. Just mention to everyone where you live.
Say where you're coming from, Jamie.
Yeah, hi Olga. I'm sorry I missed your half your presentation, but I'm your neighbor from Alaska, so I share with you much of the same, I think, same concerns and issues in the circumpolar north. There's so much I could talk to you about, I think. But I'll just say a few things, and then you can respond to whatever you'd like. First of all, I'm not sure if you've seen Tobias Schwarer's work in Chukotka. Pretty interesting, because what he's pursued is a sort of the collapse of Soviet infrastructure anthropology, where he's analyzing how people in Chukotka use collapsed industrial infrastructure to reutilize it for developing more locally self-reliant subsistence hunting culture infrastructure. So I can maybe get you those references. In terms of rescue, there's such an interesting history that I know of. In fact, a relationship, two incidents of relationship in terms of rescue in the Arctic between Russia and Alaska in the United States. One is a very interesting event that happened in the 1950s on St. Lawrence Island, where a U.S. Navy spy plane supposedly was shot down by a Russian MiG, and it landed on St. Lawrence Island, and the entire crew was rescued by Siberian Yupik people, and they wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for those people. So I've been to that site. I've been taken there on St. Lawrence Island by people from the community of Gamble to see the crashed the spy plane that was shot down by a Russian MiG. Pretty interesting. Then fast forwarding, I'll talk about what I've seen. What I've decided is the more larger, and this we have to qualify this, but the larger vulnerability in the circumpolar north, in my opinion, for indigenous communities is the reliance on industrial infrastructure and fossil fuel for survival at this point. Now, climate change is also an extremely important vulnerability, but I will argue in regards to the question of hope that the circumpolar north actually has more hope for indigenous communities in the face of climate change than do many of other places on the planet. But the problem that's arisen, at least in Alaska, is that the resilience of the communities has declined because of the extreme reliance on fossil energy and industrial infrastructure. And in respect to all aspects of survival, including subsistence activities, we don't have people driving reindeer sleds in Alaska. So every single amount of mobility is all fossil energy based. And one example I'll give is that, and this will go full circle back to Russia, and then I'll stop. About 6 years ago, one of our communities was not able to get its diesel heating fuel. All of our communities, remote communities, depend on diesel heating fuel for winter heating and electricity generation generally. And the only way that fuel arrives is either by a barge in the water or an airplane that a tanker airplane that ships the fossil energy, ships the diesel fuel to the communities. Now, because all of the housing is modern industrial type of housing that relies on this fossil energy infrastructure, if they don't receive their fuel, heating fuel for the winter, then they're in a complete survival situation. In fact, it's a humanitarian catastrophe. About 6 years ago, one of our communities did not receive their fuel, and the airport no longer shipped the fuel.
Did we lose Jeremy? Did we lose Jeremy?
Maybe he will get back in a second or in a minute. Let's wait.
Lost his volume.
Oh, he's come back, I think.
Good.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I can stop now.
Thank you, James. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear your final bit, but I can imagine like what you're talking about. The reliance and dependence, heavy dependence on industrial infrastructures. Actually, this is what makes Alaskan indigenous communities more vulnerable, and indeed it actually borders with the humanitarian catastrophe, because of the there was so much invested into industrial infrastructure in Alaska, and something that what makes Alaska stand out from Siberia is exactly this kind of amazing, because I've been to Alaska several times, this amazing air connection, this amazing, quite elaborate transportation system that is geared and designed to rely heavily on fuel, on extractive industry that is also driving environmental destruction. So all of that is kind of very well, then feeds into climate change, because climate change, if we look at it from the point of the Anthropocene, what we see is a result of all these several factors that playing out towards making human communities, indigenous communities, more vulnerable. And again, in Siberia, I'm not completely saying that, oh, they're so resilient, they can do on their own, not at all. They are vulnerable equally, They also need fuel. They also need all sorts of, resources that are maintained for the connections, sustained by the state infrastructure. All of that is budgeted and financed and supported by state budget. So all of that is completely intertwined. What I wanted to show is that apart from all this complexity, all these vulnerabilities, there is always a moment where people show their resilience and their expert system that is out there, that can be used as a resource and strategy in dealing with the particular calamities. And I think I'm here dealing with with the convergence of different type of expert systems, that can combine both science, climate science, indigenous knowledge, and techno responses, including artificial intelligence. So this is what I'm looking at, and what you've just described is also pertinent to understanding Siberian communities. I mean, there is any indigenous communities that are not anymore impacted by extractive industries or industrial infrastructures. So, and of course, I mean, it is a fact, no one denies that. It just, I more look at the edges of knowledge or trajectories of knowledge that could be productively used in devising specific strategies or showing how indigenous knowledge and what are those facets of knowledge that are so essential for understanding the climate change dynamic in the Arctic. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I have assessed in the past. It's my opinion, based on my understanding of the Siberian side, that Siberian communities are in fact probably more resilient in the face of these changes than are Alaska communities, because of the Americanized infrastructural development that occurred in Alaska. So that's one of my analyses. And lastly, one of the other things I would say is that in terms of those knowledges, those ways of dealing with some of these potential crises, one thing I've noticed is that rather than an immediate return subsistence economy, what people in the North have is they have immediate return like type psychology of dealing with all of these things. And that actually creates a ton of resilience. It creates vulnerability in terms of thinking about long-range consequences of their own actions, but it actually creates a really strong capacity to cope with crises when they hit. And I think that is one component of hope. Another component of hope that at least we have going on is that, well, we have a large-scale decline really in viable caribou habitat, reindeer habitat, because of the growing shrubification, the northwards movement of shrubs on the landscape. we have northward migrations of these different subsistence species, which is presenting all kinds of interesting new opportunities for a different subsistence adaptation potentially. But then again, mobility becomes the issue because especially winter survival and winter mobility becomes the crux of how to develop localized resilient communities, because the winter conditions are the changing winter conditions are making it so that people can't rely on snow and ice travel anymore. Anyways, I'll stop. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, James. I absolutely agree. I once brought Alaskan Yupik to Siberia, and what they told me is that that their first impression is that they have returned to their grandparents' pasts, because this is exactly they said this is how our grandparents lived, and they were so strong, they could stay without electricity, right in the great outdoors, taking care of themselves through subsistence activities, just only subsistence, that's it. And they were like so astonished to see how Avena reindeer herders used reindeer. That was their mainstay and their main resource, and both for transportation means too. They kind of took trips on the by reindeer caravan, and they were absolutely astonished. But they also admitted how hard what a hard lifestyle it is, and they have forgotten how to take care of themselves just through subsistence activities. And one thing, but then I've been to Alaska and I saw how still they are resilient. I mean, the way they read weather conditions, the kind of knowledge they're using to move through the land and still stay, kind of strong despite all odds, is absolutely fascinating. One thing that, of course, what makes absolutely vulnerable is the stationary lifestyle that they have been have been basically coercively forced on, and they're staying there. And this is what makes them especially vulnerable in the face of climate change, climate events such as, for example, Mirbak, not hurricane, or typhoon. So last year, and that stationary settlements actually were hit heavily. And this is something that, hunting economies like Yupik and Inupiat have never, they've always been mobile. And when the state prescribes you and tells you how you have to live and stay on one spot, despite eons and eons of traditions of moving around this vast, Arctic tundra, is violence. This is what makes communities most vulnerable now. So, and I guess all the infrastructure that revolved around their mobility patterns in the past now are looking as a possible solution to infrastructural needs of the communities. Now they need more mobile buildings, mobile dwellings, mobile architecture, mobile transportation means that are more ecological, just like dog sleds or reindeer sleds were in the past, but unfortunately disappeared. They were actively dismantled, by the state, by the education, by infrastructure, all that has been so heavily imposed by Euro-American paradigm and Euro-American economic system. Even now, have been speaking to several natural scientists who actually looked at it, as the promise, as a hope. This is exactly what we need. We need more mobile dwellings in order to ensure our communities are more safe in the face of particular floods, for example. Even here in London, or such huge hubs like London, New York, or Paris are much more vulnerable than small mobile nomadic communities somewhere in the Arctic coast, because they can actually quickly pack and leave and change the location. Now it is impossible, these huge, gigantic hubs of populations that are about to face huge floods, with the permafrost thawing, with the disappearance of the Arctic Ocean ice, then it is getting quite likely. So we have to think now out of box, but also including try to think respectively, but also draw from this type of expertise indigenous communities in the Arctic have always had. Yeah.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions, or shall we bring this to a thank Olga very much. Irene, do you want to put a question or put it in the chat? Irene?
Yeah, hi, Olga. Thank you so much. My question is about the resources that the people in Yakutsk had ready to use after just one call. So they, in your narrative, you showed very clearly that they were prepared for an emergency, and it was not only the knowledge how to do it, but also they had the resources. They had the vehicles, they had the blankets, they had the food. Everything was ready in the middle of the night. So can you tell us more about that, about the preparations of communities for emergencies and the especially on the side of the resources they have to anticipate for such events?
I'm sure what they knew as soon as the driver identified the location, right? As soon as they heard the location, this is River Minkule, they said, they straight away understood the distance. They straight away understood the landscape that is in between this and these mountains. So it means they hardly have any connection with outside world. So it means they straight away realize it is the coldest point in the high passage mountains. They straight away understood that when they arrive, the passengers all about to freeze. All these kind of tiny knowledges, right? Tiny details, and the knowledge of the route has actually helped to devise the resource, and mobilize resources straight away. So the resources, precisely the rapid response, they were asleep, almost like. So it means like since they know how grave the situation is, they woke up, connected very quickly. Their vehicles were exactly ready to start the trip, you know, to jump into that and have hot food straight away. And I remember even they brought bottles of vodka because they knew people are going to be so cold, you know, dangerously cold. So anything that could warm them up a little bit would also help. You know, so warm blankets, they knew everything should be prepared for distribution among passengers, because they heard the number of people that are stuck, what type of vehicles they were there. They straight away assessed, okay, they probably have the fuel for another hour or 30 minutes, you know. So they understood that at that point when they arrive, they need a quickly, let's say, provide this instant help on the spot, you know. And I think all the knowledge about temperature regime as well, you know, how fast they're going to be frozen, and what sort of vanities, whether it is Toyota, ice, ice, or Russian van called, just a second, I've forgotten the title. Anyway, so they knew the Russian post-Soviet van would stay warmer a little bit than Toyota high ice, because Toyota high ice freeze immediately almost, you know. So they straight away understood that, and how long it will take. All that type of, you know, mobilization is extremely important in assessing the dangers and the risks, and how likely they are going to freeze. So all that preparedness is actually, I realize, is extremely essential. And the fact that it is their friend, that they have been helping each other for decades, you know, they knew how he's dressed, probably they knew how he would behave at a certain point, you know, during that situation. They knew that, you know. So And the way they came, they were absolutely calm. They were ready to, like, they were there for us, you know, instantly. And that was actually struck me, literally impressed me by their efficiency, by their empathy, all this kind of human response, very human and humane response. This is what made us survive, you know, humanity, you know, humanness, kindness, generosity, not that kind of me culture that actually it's all about me, you know, it's my like free time, you know, it's not, yes, they've done it for free. And this is what makes the response work, you know.
Thank you.
Marvelous.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a lovely way to sum it up, I think. I think we should really thank Olga for such a beautiful, concrete discussion of this facing risk and the challenges of risk through this very flexible, resilient type of mindset that, as she says, is humanity, is what is in humanity's heritage, without a doubt. And the importance that Jamie was bringing out of, you know, mobility and nomadic strategies as ways to mitigate these risks, so important as well. So that's been a really great learning experience for some of us, I think. It's really helpful. So just everybody, please say thank you very much for Olga for doing the Zoom with us. And we really hope that she's going to be able to come and actually talk live sometime to Radical Anthropology as well in the near future. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga.
Thank you
Very much.
Very much, Olga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla, and everyone else. Wonderful questions, and I think I really enjoyed, you know, this time spent with you guys. You know, thank you.
Great, lovely. That's lovely.
Okay, fantastic.
Thanks to all for coming to the Zoom, and we have another Zoom next week with Dion Liebenberg, who'll be speaking, I think, from Cape Town, in fact, is why he's on Zoom. And he's going to be talking about, well, again, about trying to look at animist cosmologies from a perspective of human evolution. His talk's called Mimetic Performance, Cognitive Evolution and Mixed Creatures, by which he's talking about therianthropes, so mixed human-animal creatures. So please do come back on the Zoom next week if you can do so, and we look forward to seeing you then. Many, many thanks again to Olga. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you, Olga. Goodbye.